Shadowmourne was one of two legendaries in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Players may recognize it as the sister blade to Frostmourne, which is the unholy rune blade that corrupted Prince Arthas Menethil and turned him into an agent of the Lich King. He found it in his campaign into Northrend and took it as his weapon to take vengeance against the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis. The blade took hold of him, however, and he lost control of his own will, eventually leading to him becoming the Lich King at the behest of Frostmourne itself. Similar in design, Shadowmourne is etched with unholy runes and gains power from the souls of its victims, and it takes a powerful wielder to control it, lest they suffer the same fate as the fallen prince. The only difference from Frostmourne being that it's of course an axe rather than a sword. It was, and still is, obtainable by players in the Icecrown Citadel, home of the Lich King himself, and the expansion's final big raid tier. Only 3 classes can obtain it, and that's the Warrior, Paladin, and most appropriately, the Death Knight, the new class for the expansion. It involved a fairly long quest chain that spanned both inside and outside of the raid, and at the time, only the best of the best would be able to make it through this gauntlet to finally obtain the unholy weapon. So, in this video, I'd like to go over this chain from start to finish. It all started with the Sacred and the Corrupt quest found within the raid itself. You got it from the current leader of the Death Knights, Darian Mograine, near the entrance of the raid. To accept it, you'd need friendly reputation with the Ashen Verdict, which is a faction that's tied to the raid. You got this pretty quickly just by killing trash and bosses. You can get it after a few runs of just clearing all of the trash up to the first boss, Merogar, and then just resetting over and over. Once you had that done, you could grab the quest, and the objective is to build the base of Shadowmourne by getting some very specific reagents. First is 25 Primordial Serra Knights. These are rare reagents dropped by the bosses held within the raid. It's that hardened blood of the old god Yogg-Saron, hence the name, and they'll be handy in creating an evil soul-devouring weapon of unimaginable power. When it was current content, these were high in demand as you would imagine, and they were quite pricey as a result. The next 2 reagents we needed were the Blood of Rotface and Festergut. These were 2 bosses held fairly deep into the raid in the Unholy Wing, and they only dropped them on 25-man mode. It was during this expansion was when they first introduced the option of running 10-man versions of every raid. They were a bit easier, so to keep the chain challenging, they limited a lot of this stuff to 25-man only, the Bloods included. And the last item we needed was Light's Vengeance, the discarded weapon of Prince Arthas himself. When Arthas found Frostmourne, as mentioned earlier, he made a paid class switch from Paladin to Death Knight and tossed aside this weapon in favor for the Unholy Rune Blade. Paying a visit to Dragonblight, you'll see the landing spot for Arthas' army and the remains of the ships that he burned long ago. And in a nearby cavern, you'll find the former resting place of Frostmourne. The weapon laid before you, convenient as can be, but upon walking up to it, you find that it's a trap. The Lich King doubles as a master of bamboozling and encases you with chains of ice.
So predictable. Did you truly expect to fulfill Mograine's task unopposed? You both shall suffer as his father does. In eternal unrest.
You're ambushed by the Lich King's seemingly unbeatable swarm of level 80 zombies, and an undead necromancer appears. But to your right is Light's Vengeance. If you run up to it and harness its holy power, it'll fly up into the air and smite any nearby ghoul and break the necromancer's immunity shield.
Fear not, Master. I shall rend the flesh of your enemy.
You then engage him one-on-one, and if you're successful, you'll find Light's Vengeance free for the taking on the ground next to you. And with this, he had all 4 reagents. Returning to Mograine, he takes Light's Vengeance, and along with the blood and the Serenite, he forges it into a weapon called Shadow's Edge.
So, it has begun. Behold! The binding of sacred and corrupt, the forging of Shadow's Edge, a weapon of untold potential. Bend it to your will, and you shall wield unspeakable power. Fail, and your soul shall forever be its slave.
For now, this will be our tool for harvesting souls, and we'll slowly empower it to transform it into Shadowmourne. It's an actual usable weapon, as you can see, and quite good at the time. In its original state, it had some strength, stamina, some red sockets, some critical strike, and armor penetration, which is a stat that they removed a long time ago. This would be equivalent to 25-man raiding loot at the time, and you needed to have it equipped for the rest of the chain to complete it. Mograine warns you of the weapon's power over you, and that you must not let it take control, and if you fail, it's his duty to deliver you from this life. For the next quest, you're tasked with consuming the souls of 50 of the Lich King's minions within the raid. This was originally a staggering 1,000, and it was only changed later for convenience sake for people returning to the expansion. This is done by just killing enemies here with Shadow's Edge equipped, so originally it took many raids to knock out. At this point, the Lich King will start taunting you and trying to get you to succumb to the will of Shadow's Edge. Here are some of the audio clips that you'll hear.
Take them, mortal. These souls will again be mine, soon enough. Soon, mortal, you too shall have a blade for a prison. Remember, hero, I too once sought a weapon of great power.
Once you successfully harvest all 50 souls, you're led into the first real challenging part of the quest chain, and that's Unholy Infusion. Shadowmourne requires the power of 3 elements: blood, frost, and unholy. These powers lay dormant, and we need to infuse this weapon with all 3 to bring it to its full potential. For the Unholy Empowerment, you have to venture deep into the Plague Wing and defeat the 3rd and final boss there, Professor Putricide. During the fight, the person on the quest line had to have Shadow's Edge equipped and click the table to transform into an abomination. You would then have to go over these puddles of green slime that grow throughout the room and absorb them, and when you did that enough, you would be able to infuse the power into Shadow's Edge. Your transformation would wear off, and you would then have to successfully kill the boss. You needed this abomination for the fight, so this was like doing a hard mode, and it required a lot of coordination with your guild. Doing it today is pretty trivial. The only obstacle is if you're solo, the boss despawns once you transform, so the only way to get around this is to be a death knight with a pet, or just have a friend with you. But with this, that was the first element properly infused. The next step was the dreaded blood infusion. Similar to Unholy, you had to complete this on the final boss of the Bloodwing. This time, it's the Blood Queen Lanethil. She has a mechanic where she bites a player at random, and after 1 minute, that player turns into a vampire and attacks the raid unless he satiates himself by biting another player, infecting them with the same debuff. For this quest, you need to bite 3 raid members total, and then kill the Blood Queen. This was easier said than done though, since for each person you bite, you take a stacking damage over time effect, and at 3 stacks, it required a couple of healers dedicated to keeping the wielder of Shadow's Edge alive and healthy. Note that for any of these quests, if the wielder died, you failed, so once again, lots of coordination was required, and it was really a team effort to get through it. But with this, there's just one element left, and that's Frost. You needed to face the final boss of the Frostwing, Sindragosa, and get hit by her Frost Breath 3 times while wielding Shadow's Edge. Again, another hard mode here, as only the tanks were supposed to get hit by her breath, so you had to have some more healers at the ready, dedicated to the wielder, to keep him or her alive throughout the fight. And, just like the other parts of the chain, this all had to be done on the 25-man version of the raid. As challenging as all of this was, it got even harder with the next step, which was the Splintered Throne quest. This was easily the most time-consuming part of the chain, because you had to collect 50 of an item called a Shadowfrost Shard. When Kil'jaeden turned Ner'zhul into the Lich King, he created an icy vessel which kept his spirit under control, and Arthas eventually broke this prison, and these shards were shattered across the Citadel, and are now held by the Lich King's lieutenants. Only 1 shard dropped per boss, so if you had 2 Shadow's Edge wielders in your raid, you'd have to think of a way to divvy out the shards. For the sake of progression, most guilds just focused on one person first, and once they finished their quest, they'd move on to the next, rather than splitting the shards evenly or doing a random roll. So, this stage in general took a very long time. Since there are 12 bosses in the raid, it could be as low as 5 weeks if you were extremely lucky, or it could take several months if you are unlucky. The sweet spot for most people is around 2-ish months, I'd say, with average luck. So, shard by shard, and slowly but surely, you moved closer and closer to the blade's completion. Months later, after you had collected 50 of them, you returned to Mograine, and he offered you the quest Empowerment. He takes the shards and Shadow's Edge from you to a nearby forge, and with a small explosion of power, Shadowmourne is born.
Where most would falter, you have overcome. You have withstood the torment of the Lich King himself, and now Shadowmourne is yours. Go now. Wield this mighty weapon, and direct the countless living souls that empower it. Go now, and defeat the Prince of Darkness.
The weapon in its original form had a slow 3.7 speed, a whopping 344 damage per second, a hefty amount of strength, stamina, critical strike, armor penetration, and 3 sockets which held any gem of any color, back when gems had certain colors and you got bonuses if you matched them properly. Very similar to Shadow's Edge, but just with more stats. And since this weapon is basically the epitome of all evil, it has a soul harvesting effect, just like its sister blade. Your melee attacks have a chance to drain a soul fragment, giving you some strength, and when you acquire 10 of those, you unleash an effect called Chaos Bane, which dealt some shadow damage split between all nearby enemies. But that wasn't the end of it. Even after getting the legendary, you got a follow-up quest to kill the Lich King himself, and to loot an item called a sealed chest from his body. Returning to Mograine one final time, he unlocks the chest for you, which contains mementos of the fallen prince's past, showing that through all of his evil deeds and nature, he was never able to truly let go of who he once was. You'd return these mementos to their respective owners located inside the instance.
Father.
Darian, my son. At last, I am able to lay my eyes upon you again.
Father, I feared for your sanity.
The Lich King tormented me without end, Darian. Endlessly, he sought to break my will, to force me to serve him, to bind me to his blade. Finally, when events demanded his full attention, he left me. The one memory I clung to, Darian, the one thought that kept me from giving in, it was your sacrifice, my son, that again saved me from eternal peril.
Father, for you, I would give my life 1,000 times.
Oh, lad. How I miss those endless days in Lordaeron. Sharpening your skill with this dull blade. Forging you into a weapon meant to withstand the demands of a great destiny. You sure put them skills to use, didn't you, lad? If only I'd been able to stop you that day, how different things might have been. If only I'd have never discovered that accursed blade. Farewell, Arthas, my brother.
Arthas. Alas, hero of Azeroth, you give me a greater gift than you know. Long have I struggled to forgive the prince for his terrible transgressions. My soul has been racked with unbearable anxiety, dark thoughts, distancing me from the light. I recall clearly the gleam of pride in his eye as he stood before me, eager to defeat the enemies of the light. Eager to defend his people, no matter the cost. It is this memory of Arthas that I choose to keep in my heart. I shall always be in your debt, friend. Thank you.
So, it is done. I had not dared to trust my senses. Too many times has the Lich King made me to be a fool. Finally, he has been made to pay for the atrocities he imposed upon my people. May Azeroth never fail to remember the horrible price we paid for our weakness, for our pride. But what now, hero? What of those freed from his grasp, but still shackled to their mortal coils? Leave me. I have much to ponder.
What's this? He kept it. All this time, he kept it. I knew. I sensed a part of him still alive, trapped, struggling. Oh, Arthas. Perhaps he might someday remember what he once was. By the light, may he at last find rest, free from the icy grip of that terrible blade.
As rewards for all of this, you got a mount called the Crimson Death Charger, the epic quality Tabard of the Silver Hand, a toy that turns you into a Frost Dwarf, a locket that teleports you to Dalaran, and a music box which summons some banshees who sing you a song. You can choose to keep all of this yourself, or sell them on the auction house since they're not soulbound. They fetch a pretty penny, so it's actually an interesting way to farm some gold. And that's the Shadowmourne questline in its entirety. Needless to say, this legendary was quite powerful, dwarving every other weapon in the game by far. If you saw someone wielding it in arenas, you were in for some pain, that's all I can remember. It was the first expansion where they started giving out legendaries with long quest chains like this, rather than just lucky drops like with Vanilla and the Burning Crusade. The only exception I can think of is Thunder Fury, which technically had a quest, but to start it, you had to get very lucky and get not only one, but 2 legendary drops. And even still, the quest was just 2 parts long. With Wrath, they switched to a more consistent style with these shards that you had to collect slowly over time, and also introducing challenges of both solo and group content, as well as reagent collecting. This style would continue until Legion, where they went back to the random drop system, which a lot of people didn't like. The weapon was iconic enough to warrant its own trading card in the official TCG game. As you can see, it gains power from fallen allies, playing into that whole soul harvesting shtick. As I said, still obtainable today, and while it doesn't have any actual use in current day content, it has an interesting story tied to it, and those items you get from the final part net you quite a bit of gold, as I said. You can actually get some use out of it though in time walking dungeons, since those scale you down anyways. Only in the Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King events though, since they're of course 70 and 80. So, kind of a neat way to put some use to it. But with that, I'll leave you here. One of the most legendary weapons, from one of the most legendary quest lines, from one of the most legendary expansions ever made. But, as you know,
No king rules forever, my son.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.